Chris Bowen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David. Good morning.
I want to start with fuel supply. What's the latest you can tell us about the supply of diesel and petrol coming into Australia?
Yeah, so we updated our figures yesterday, as we do weekly now, and actually supply of petrol's gone up a little bit, 38 days worth of supply, and diesel and jet fuel both at 30 days, which is pretty flat, and that indicates that while we've released more from the strategic reserve, the ships continue to arrive in good numbers, and both our refineries are working absolute full pelt, and they're both entirely 100% dedicated to Australian suppliers, not exports. So we are really seeing the same, if not slightly more, level of petrol and diesel in Australia than we did just before this crisis began.
You've been making the point, though, that from mid-April there's less certainty about whether those ships will keep coming. This is only a few weeks away. So what happens then?
So I can give you a bit of a flavour of that, David. So we get on average around 81 boats a month delivering fuel to Australia. We're aware of 6 boats that have been cancelled out of that 81 on average, and some of those have already been replaced by the importers and refiners with other sources. So that gives us, I think, some context of what we're dealing with. That's not to say that, it isn't a very challenged environment internationally, and of course the flow of oil to Asian refineries has slowed, and that has downward impacts on us. But also I think Australians can take the context that while we are dealing with that uncertainty, we still have 2 refineries working full pelt. Would be better if we'd had more, sure, but we do have 2. And we also have the boats continuing to arrive, and the refiners and importers are working very closely with government to replace those 6 at this point that have been cancelled or deferred with other suppliers, and that is occurring.
So where were those 6 boats that have now been cancelled? Where were they coming from?
I think primarily from Asia, from the different Asian refineries. It's not a matter of government policy that they're being cancelled.
South Korea or Singapore or Malaysia?
A combination, David. I mean, Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia are big. They're the big suppliers. But also some of the ships that have replaced them have come from Malaysia, for example. And so it's not a matter of government policy. It's a matter of the refineries seeing some supply problems with their crude oil, which is then impacting on their ability to deliver to their customers, including Australia, but not exclusively Australia, obviously.
Are you worried that more than 6 will be cancelled from mid-April?
Well, I've always been clear, we're in an uncertain environment, so that's why have done and are doing all the preparatory work, as I indicated during the week. But nevertheless, I do think that sort of 6 out of 80 does give us, at this point, some of the context of what we're dealing with. It's not without challenges, but also I don't want people to think, and I can understand, in the debate, people think, well, all the ships are coming now and one day they'll all stop in one go. That is highly unlikely to be the case. It's much more likely that there'll be bumps in supply, but that governments will work with the refiners and the importers to manage those and minimise impact.
So the importers are trying to find supply now from where they can. I understand they're looking at the United States and Texas in particular, but India as well. Are you okay with ships coming from India, which of course would include Russian oil?
Well, they're getting it primarily at the moment, as I said, from Malaysia, a little bit from Mexico and the United States. Now, I've always been clear, we do not support Russian oil, but we do also understand that there is a blending of Russian oil in various points of the supply chain, which means it can be hard to trace. India
so Russian oil will end up here? Is that the bottom line?
This is not a change, David. There's always been challenges in identifying exactly how much oil is in the product that it gets bought from. And again, this is not an Australian issue. This is every country in the world's dealing with this. How do you deal with a complicated supply chain where oil gets blended? It's not all oil from one country that goes into a delivery. It all gets blended in. But our view on Russian oil is very clear. We don't support we don't support the Putin regime maximising their oil exports, and therefore we are supportive of the international efforts in relation to that.
Finding supply from different parts of the world can come at a much higher expense. Is the government willing to subsidise the importation of fuel to keep the price down here?
No, our focus at the moment, my entire focus is on security of supply, on delivery. And again, we've always been clear, pretty upfront, and as has previous governments, to be fair, the biggest impact on petrol prices will be the international oil price. That has always been the case and will continue to be the case.
Let's turn to the distribution of fuel that's here. You said a little earlier there's actually more supply here now than there was before the war began. So why are so many petrol stations in Australia unable to get supply?
Well, I think what we've dealt with, David, is a combination of things. Obviously, we had a huge spike in demand, and that's just a fact. 100% increase in demand in a few days, and whether it's petrol, diesel, toilet paper, any commodity, that is a supply chain is not going to cope with that.
Did that take you by surprise? That doubling
when
of
demand doubles. When demand doubles. Well, you know, obviously the bombing of Iran occurred on the 28th of February. The National Security Committee met at 8:30 the next morning. I'm a member of that committee. The Prime Minister put me on that committee for this purpose, for this eventuality, because energy will always be a national security matter. Obviously, we're focused on things like gas and coal, and as well as oil and petrol.
I'm just wondering if you were expecting this demand spike, though. Is it what you expected?
Well, I think you should always expect Australians to be concerned when they see oil ships being bombed on their televisions at night. So yes, that was understandable and expected.
Obviously, so why have we seen these distribution problems then, with petrol stations unable to get supply?
Well, David, if I could just finish the point. We've seen a massive increase in demand accompanied by that increase in regional areas. Obviously, the regional areas are where the supply chain is the hardest to manage. It takes longer to get from Geelong and Brisbane to the various regional areas. You've also got lots of rural suppliers, distributors and service stations working on very tight margins and then not always able to access fuel that's available. You've also got the spot market working there. So what the refineries have had to do is, understandably under the law, prioritise those for whom they have contractual obligations. The spot market hasn't really been operating, and all that's had its biggest impact on rural and regional Australia.
Well, it is having a big impact in rural and regional Australia, on farmers, on trucking, on motorists generally. Your new fuel supply coordinator is providing information, but doesn't, as I understand it, have power to direct supplies anywhere. You do, though, Minister. You do have those powers under the Liquid Fuel Emergency Act. At what point will we get to when you actually trigger that act and use that power to direct supply?
Yeah, David, that's right. The National Fuel Emergency Act 1984. It's never been invoked ever, not through the first two Gulf Wars, COVID. It's not designed to be invoked lightly. It really has powers primarily around defence and health in the first instance to ensure that those key areas are getting diesel that they need, but also other forms of fuel. I would need to be satisfied that there's a real shortage and that the powers under that Act are useful. I'd need to advise Her Excellency the Governor-General of that. I would need advice. I can tell you I wouldn't do that without advice from our National Oil Emergency Committee, which has been Oil Supply Emergency Committee, which has met now, I think, 7 times. It has...
Just who's on that? Just tell us who's on that committee.
Representatives of every state and territory, as well as Commonwealth representatives. They've been meeting very regularly, much more than in previous crises, much more than the Ukraine crisis.
And that would need to be a collective decision, would it, that we've reached the point to trigger that act?
Yeah, I wouldn't exercise those quite remarkable powers unless I had pretty strong advice that it was necessary in the circumstances. And obviously, it's something I would work through with the states. I'm not envisaging needing that. I'm certainly not hoping that we need that. I certainly don't envisage it being necessary. But of course, you know, it's there. In extreme, if necessary.
But I guess that's what a lot of people are wondering. If this war drags on for another couple of weeks, will we get to the point where you will have to trigger that act and do things like fuel rationing?
Well, I mean, if you look at, again, there's existing plans here. There's the National Liquid Emergency Fuel Policy Response. Yeah, that's not an act, it's a response. It's actually a COAG, which was before the National Cabinet agreed this 20 years ago. And it still exists. And it runs through the different powers that the states and territories have, what the Commonwealth Minister has, what you would do before you get there, voluntary measures, encouragement, etc. We're a long way from that, David. We're a long way from that. And as I said,
what does long way mean, though? Just to give people a sense.
Well, I mean, as I said, if we've got, you know, at this point, say 74 out of the 80 ships that we expect arriving over April and May, we've got our refineries working full pelt and not exporting any diesel or petrol to any other country, just supplying Australia, which is the situation now, after some changes I made a couple of weeks ago. That would indicate to me that we are continuing to see our fuel supply being strong. Yes, you know, that doesn't mean, I understand people hear me say that and then they say, well, I can't get petrol at my service station, both things can't be true. Well, actually, both things can be true. We can have strong fuel imports into Australia, and our refinery is working very well, and also have distribution challenges, unacceptable distribution challenges if you're in a regional area and struggling to get fuel. We have, a number of petrol stations around the country. Again, in the greater scheme of things, yes, it's a small percentage of the service stations that can't get fuel. But does that mean it's easy for those people who rely on that service station?
So just coming back to the question.
No, it's not. It's a big problem for those people.
So no rationing for the next, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? When do we get to the point where this becomes a necessity?
Well, again, David, there's a process in place. I've had a meeting with my state and territory colleagues. They have strong powers. Traditionally, when in those rare instances, when I was a kid, maybe when you were a kid, David, in the 80s in Sydney, I remember petrol rationing was done by state governments. The state governments do have powers there. Yes, the Commonwealth Government, under the Fuel Emergencies Act, has powers. We are not contemplating at this point needing to use any of those powers. Of course, they're there. And I think that can also give Australians reassurance that, yes, there are powers there and there's plans in place and prudent contingency planning for the worst, should this get worse and should it roll on for a long time. But I really, because we're sending the message to Australians that please buy as much fuel as you need, but no more, no less, I do think that it's important to put that in context.
What about the message from the International Energy Agency? It's telling countries that they should look at more work from home, less road usage, various ideas around cars using the roads one day and not the other. Would you urge businesses, for example, to be more flexible on work from home, let people stay home?
Well, I think that's a sensible thing to do in any environment, really. Work from home has become an important part of
But in this Australian oil crisis moment.
Australian working life. And again, I think some people would already be doing that. There are other people for whom that's not an option. And I think people would already be looking at their options to minimise their fuel use at the moment. For other people, it's a lot harder. So I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is necessary, and the IEA report is really, if you like, a smorgasbord of options for all countries around the world to look at in terms of their own personal circumstances.
Clearly, if you've got an electric vehicle right now, you're in a much better position. Do you think EV tax breaks or indeed government incentives for home batteries should be wound back in the budget, or is it the wrong time to do that?
Well, let's look at both. The home batteries policy is an outstanding success. 280,000 home batteries installed in just the last 8 months, and maybe relevant to your conversation with Mally, predominantly in the outer suburbs of Australia and the regions of Australia who are, this program is delivering for. It's an outstanding success. I announced some changes last year to make sure the program is sustainable. It is sustainable, and those changes are the changes that we've made. In relation to electric vehicles, slightly different issue. The Treasurer and I did announce some time ago a review. In fact, that was a review that was always planned for this point because the electric vehicle tax cut's been operating now for a couple of years. It was always planned for this time to see whether it's working as intended, whether it's the most efficient way going forward, and we'll have more to say about that on budget night.
All right, watch this space. Look, a couple of other things. The Nationals leader, Matt Canavan, reckons the government should fund exploratory drilling for oil in the Great Australian Bight. There's been exploratory drilling there before. Is it worth another go?
Well, I think Mr Canavan really would be better focusing on the economics and the engineering rather than the sort of culture war element of it. The fact of the matter is that he, when he was Resources Minister, issued licences for exploration in the Great Australian Bight, and they were handed back by BP and Chevron because they couldn't make it work. It's deep, it's geologically challenging, it's a long way from the demand sources, and so therefore the economics and engineering indicated it was too expensive. So, he had a go, fair enough. It didn't work. It's not a matter of, culture war saying, well, we're for the Great Australian Bight and you're against it. Economics and engineering indicate that it's very difficult.
Okay, the Coalition's also having a go at you for being a part-time minister because of your duties as the president or co-president of the COP climate talks this year. How much time are you spending on that at the moment?
Well, let's just deal with that and deal with it in two parts, if I could, David. Firstly, the specific and then the general. Firstly, on the specific, frankly, I was astounded that the opposition would politicise a meeting with the Pacific ministers. A meeting, by the way, I've chaired for every year for the last 4 years, well before I became president of COP negotiations. And for Mr Tehan to frankly insult the Pacific ministers, including a Prime Minister and a President, who came for this meeting to say, I should tell them I'm too busy, I'm too important for them, was pretty insulting to the Pacific. So that was disappointing. And, Mr Tehan's well aware, the day before I hosted the King and Queen of Denmark, and he thought that was okay. There was no criticism of that. So he should explain why one's okay and the other's not. In relation to COP, I'm spending no extra time on my international engagements at this point, but the difference is it's more consequential. You know, for example, we've got the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency in Sydney, in Australia this week. He's coming in the middle of the biggest energy crisis to talk to Australia, in no small part because of our role now, our heightened role in international negotiations. We in the Albanese government think Australia playing a bigger role internationally, more consequential, same amount of time. The Climate Minister is always engaged internationally, or it should be. It's a key part of the job. But it means that the time I spend on that has more impact, not more time at this point, but more impactful time. So, you know, really, I think, David, it's frankly the opposition in this situation had a chance to step up and be constructive like we did in COVID. Unfortunately, they've chosen sledges, not solutions, insults, not ideas.
A final one, Chris Bowen, the South Australian election result. We heard Peter Malinauskas earlier make the point that there are still some warning signs there for Labor in One Nation's emergence. What do you take, what does federal Labor take from this result?
Well, firstly, congratulations to Malley. He has cemented his place as a Labor great in history, and not just by the size of the election win, which is, you know, eye-wateringly large, but because he's led a very active reformist government. And in my case, and in my interest, you know, a jurisdiction with the highest renewable ambition in the world, really, and, you know, despite the right-wing noise machine, the South Australian people told me to get on with it. But we in our government agree with Malley. I mean, we take not one thing for granted. It's about delivery, delivery, delivery for the outer suburbs. And again, I think it's easy for people who don't live in the outer suburbs, I mean, I do live in the outer suburbs, to have views about what people in the outer suburbs think. You know, take, for example, high EV take-up and battery take-up that we've talked about. I'm here in Parramatta. It's Polestar Parade out here, you know, and Blacktown is BYD Boulevard. People are on this transition. And our highest battery take-up has been in the outer suburbs and regions of Australia as well. So it's about delivery, and it's about helping Australians with cost of living pressure in a way that also supports the fact that we can reduce our emissions and introduce more cheaper electricity. And David, we haven't had a chance to talk about the fact that the draft electricity prices came out today, which showed reductions of up to 10% for households and 20% for small businesses, which again is an indication that turns out renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, and when we're using less gas and more renewable energy, it's putting downward pressure on prices.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that at the next opportunity. Energy Minister Chris Bowen, thank you for joining us this morning.
Great pleasure, David. Good on you.